When I was all the way back at the times when I was an assistant at Strongroom, that was one of the first studios to have a 5.1 music mixing sort of facility. And as an assistant, I used to get dragged in to assist on really good things, Prodigy, Underworld, Orbital, Motorhead, things at the time where it was kind of being suggested that the band's artists should be mixing in 5.1, because back then the fan was listening to CDs predominantly. Still a few cassettes, not very many. Still vinyl, but that was a bit of a slump at that point. But CD was obviously the main thing. So the fan had gone out and spent 10, 15 quid on a disc, and that was how they were listening to it. At that point, they could probably listen to it in their living room, in their car potentially. Yeah, probably around then it was quite normal. And that was fine. But of course, there was this idea that we would be introducing surround sound for music. And as an assistant, I was very cynical of it. It was always good fun, and I got to work with some cool people, obviously, which was great. But what that meant for the person at the other end was that they had to go out and buy another disc that looked exactly the same, but it was a different type of disc, an SACD or a DVD audio. And there was two types as well. And what that meant also is you had to have something to play that on. So usually that was some kind of dedicated player, which was more expensive than a CD player, then an AVR box, something to then distribute that to amplifiers, to multiple speakers, 5.1 in the room. And that was generally only going to ever be your living room. It was definitely not your car at that point. I mean, although 5.1 did come to some cars, there was no content. So, I'm not going to say, well, it didn't fail completely. I've worked on lots and lots of 5.1 over the years, mainly of live shows, which are mainly associated with the picture, so as part of DVDs. And obviously within the film TV world, which some of you I know are kind of as interested in, that has been somewhat successful. So you have got a lot of 5.1 live shows of bands and artists. Lots of prog rock, lots of sort of bands where you've got a fan base who will go out and buy anything that they offer. So hence, my work with The Who, I did quite a lot of it. But when it came to records, as we know them, generally speaking, it didn't really pick up. So as a result, even as an assistant, I kind of felt, yeah, this is fun. But we got to the end of every single session with really cool people. I was like, yeah, that was great. Should we get to the pub? That it was literally that kind of thing, because I think they realised it was a bit futile as a format for their fans. That was mainly dance music people, but all of the other people that came through that studio, apart from the most proggy of prog rock, nobody had fans that were going to do that. So every time I did a 5.1 session over the following 20 years, there was always this element of, just make it sound great. It's a bit of fun. How many people are actually going to listen to this? And then it was actually about 2018, 19, towards the end of my time on the barge, where Pete Townsend said to me, we should look at getting Dolby Atmos on the barge. And I know the camera's on, but I just thought, fucking hell, and really, what is this? I started looking into it a little bit, and I sort of did a little bit of research and worked out that Dolby Atmos, you were Googling this was about 4 or 5 years ago, Googling it, and you came across soundbars. It's like, well, these are these magic soundbars that sit at the front of the room, and you don't need rear speakers, which was always the bugbear of most people. Okay, that's cool. And from what I can tell, this is working in the TV world. Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon, Apple TV, all of these services offering Atmos, as part of your subscription directly into your home. So I did check out a couple of those soundbars, and there were some of the big ones at the time. And there's been quite a lot of Atmos soundbars around for years now. I could name check some ones that we think are particularly good, but we're agnostic. But in the office, for example, we use a Sennheiser Ambio, which you might have heard of. And then there's things like the Sonos Arc and Beam. They can have speakers behind you. So that's the living room. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to have some big home entertainment system with multiple speakers, which would be roughly this kind of setup, but on floor standing speakers, potentially with upfirers for the heights that would bounce off the ceiling. So the idea about things bouncing off the walls and the ceilings and being calibrated is something that's been around for quite a long time now. So that was quite interesting, but still not enough for me to get overexcited. And then I kept looking into it, and suddenly I realised, hang on a minute, this works on headphones. Well, that's a game changer, because 80% of all music is listened to on headphones. So the fact that you can get an experience through headphones means that this makes it much, much more viable. Then you think about the fact that the person doesn't have to buy a CD anymore because, another disc anymore, because if it's working in streaming services for TV and film, then why can't it work for music services? And when I first joined Dolby, which is a long story, but I'd kind of got to the point where this works in headphones, this works on soundbars, these fancy new soundbars. It's not a stretch of the imagination to think that those soundbars might actually get smaller and become something more like most people, kids, teenagers, listen to music on. And they'd just had an announcement that an American brand of electric vehicle called Lucid were doing a Dolby Atmos car. The fact that it was in one car meant that it could be in all cars. Roll forward 3 years to where we are now, 4 years to where we are now. And it's in 5 models of Mercedes, new Lotus, new Polestar 3's coming. There's a Volvo that's coming. There's things that haven't been announced yet, so I can't say, but there's plenty of cars coming out with Dolby Atmos built in. And obviously you're looking around, you've probably been in this room before if you haven't already used Atmos. You're looking around at a 7.1.4 system. We have a car that we've put together in the office in London, which is a 7.1.4 system in the car. So if you can imagine roughly where they would be, you've always had tons of speakers. I mean, for the last 15, 20 years, you've had tons of speakers around you in a car. They just need separate amplifiers and a different configuration. I mean, that's the very basic way of looking at it, but you get the idea. You've got a fixed location anyway. You've got pillars above you. So we've got that car that we put together, and over the last couple of years, particularly, real life cars are now driving around. So that was massive. So pretty much everywhere you would normally listen to music, at that point 3 years ago when I joined, it felt like that was feasible. On top of that, they just had Tidal and Amazon Music announced that they were doing Dolby Atmos. So there was already 2 services on board. Within a few months of me joining, a couple of months of me joining, Quelle Surprise, Apple then announced that they were going to be doing it too. So then I realized, well, I'd been employed. Because up until that point, I was getting lots of old friends and colleagues and people I'd known from the industry into the Dolby Soho Square to do demos, rather like I'm going to do today. And they would all go, blimey, okay, it does headphones. I can see how this actually is the future this time. I can see how this is, this is the real deal. Right, should we go to the pub? And that's where it ended. Until Apple announced in June 2021 or whatever it was, I don't know, 20. As soon as Apple announced, every single one of those people that I'd done demos to got on the phone and said, right, that thing we were talking about, how many speakers do I need? Where do I get them from? What size subwoofer do I need? And of course, that meant that we went from having only 3 or 4 Atmos studios in the UK to having about 100 within the space of, well, by the end of that year, basically. We're on about 160 now. We've stopped counting. It's not, numbers of studios aren't important. Decent engineers doing a good job is obviously far more important, and the creative side of it. Yeah, I mean, and that includes all of the big, a lot of the big studios, Abbey Road, of course, RAC, Metropolis, East Coast, blah, blah, blah. I keep going with the kind of big commercial studios. But of course, stereo hasn't been mixed in big studios a lot in terms of hit records. They've mostly been done by people working out of their own spaces. So we've, enabled huge amounts of mixers who are, mixers particularly at the moment, rather than sort of producers or tracking engineers or kind of creative writer types. Mainly mixers to start with, but we're seeing a change in that as well. It's getting more and more into the nitty-gritty of people starting to think about what's coming out of those speakers when they're recording or even writing.